Alien's impact on games is hard to deny. From Metroid to Dead Space and Doom to Halo, the work of Scott, Cameron, and Giger have had countless homages and imitators. And beyond that, the franchise has created its own fair share of iconic games. So it's interesting then that when I think about the Alien franchise in video games, the first thing that comes to mind isn't Isolation or the 3 games ending in versus Predator or, God forbid, Randy Pitchford. Instead, what I think of is Obsidian Entertainment and their work shortly after the success on the second Knights of the Old Republic to do the same thing with the Alien franchise with Alien Crucible. In the few years they had been a studio, Obsidian Entertainment were quickly becoming specialists in what they affectionately called nerd mecha licenses. As the original crew abandoned the self-destructing ship of Interplay in Black Isle in 2002 and set up shop in CEO Fergus Urquhart's attic, the team quickly managed to sign Knights of the Old Republic 2, picking up where BioWare had left off. 2 years later, they'd done the same thing with Neverwinter Nights, turning around a sequel to BioWare's last Dungeons & Dragons game in 2006. Both development cycles were anything but simple, however. KOTOR 2 launched in a notoriously unfinished state, due in large part to its brief 2-year production. Neverwinter Nights 2 saw last-minute departures and leadership changes, managing to launch in a stable state only due to hard work and miracles. As work finished up on the latter, and with the cancellation of a Snow White RPG under Disney, the team continuously pitched new games to publishers, hoping to eventually work on their own IP. In early 2006, Simon Jeffrey, who is now the president of Sega and formerly worked with the team as president of LucasArts on KOTOR 2, reached out to Obsidian looking for exactly that. Taking inspiration from the tabletop role-playing game Top Secret, shows like 24, and of course James Bond, Obsidian would show Sega their action hero pitch, an espionage RPG named Alpha Protocol that was unlike any other game on the market, letting the player create their own JB, Jack Bauer, James Bond, or Jason Bourne, and blurring the line between the reactive role-playing games Obsidian was known for and the action movies that inspired it. Sega would give Alpha Protocol the green light, and 6 months later they'd reach back out to see if they were also interested in pitching an RPG for another nerd mecha license with Alien. Admittedly, on a surface level, an RPG for the Alien franchise seemed like a bit of an odd pitch. It was hard to have a game where you could have complicated conversations with the antagonist like Obsidian was known for, when that antagonist was an 8-foot-tall monster from the darkest parts of space with no real social skills. But the Alien movies aren't really just about that. Not to the real monster was man this franchise, but developers at Obsidian, particularly lead developer Josh Sawyer and lead writer Chris Avellone, were quick to talk about how the interpersonal relationships are just as big a part of these movies. A main character like Ripley rises up to meet the challenge and make hard decisions, while those around her either crumble, panic, and die gruesomely, get horrifically disfigured, or turn out to be robots. This was kind of perfect for a companion-focused RPG, and like with Alpha Protocol, it felt like there was some untapped potential in the genre for that setting. It helped though that while the deal was being signed, BioWare would release their own real-time action sci-fi game Mass Effect, once again paving the way for Obsidian. While all of this was just beginning to spin up, Sega would announce that they had officially acquired the license for Alien, with the promise of not only Obsidian's RPG Crucible, but also a first-person shooter from a pre-Borderlands Gearbox named Colonial Marines. Getting the team behind Brothers in Arms to build a squad-based game and the people behind KOTOR 2 to develop an RPG for your newly acquired license didn't seem like a bad way to start. Internally, however, cracks were already beginning to show, but it wasn't on Crucible or Colonial Marines. The problems first began in Alpha Protocol. While Obsidian had previously proved that they were capable at making RPGs, they didn't have a lot of experience making a third-person shooter, especially one that accommodated multiple playstyles and rewarded specific builds. On top of that, an espionage RPG sounds good on paper, but as pre-production went on, the vision was unclear. Playing as, quote, one of the JBs could mean dressing up as a clown or drowning a guy in the sink, and that was only one JB. The development early on was scattered, with the project pursuing these big chases, environmental kills, and massive plane crashes just for them to be cut because they were too technically demanding, too expensive, or just not actually that fun. Those technical problems weren't helped, however, by their choice to use Unreal Engine 3, which was fairly new at the time and still had quite a few rough edges. For Crucible, and likely as a result of these troubles, Obsidian turned to developing their own tech that better accommodated their needs. This was something members of the team had done in the past at their predecessor Black Isle with Jefferson, a 3D isometric engine designed for Fallout Van Buren and their cancelled Baldur's Gate 3. Looking at footage from animators' portfolios leaked in 2010 and 2013, this engine, dubbed Onyx, does look pretty solid in this context, despite how early it is in development and how closely it resembles Alpha Protocol. This, alongside glimpses at the story from interviews and forum posts from developers, offers a look into the game Aliens Crucible was going to be. While I don't want to speculate too wildly on the finer details, it seems that the game took place on the planet Caldera that, like LV-426, was home to a derelict space jockey ship. What was once a mining facility seemed to be repurposed to study how a Xeno takes on the traits of its hosts, following in the footsteps of the ancient race's research. This is, for one thing, a big reason why a lot of the concept art features some kind of out-there xenomorph hybrid designs. A more action-focused RPG like this requires a bit of enemy variety and gives the game some unique-feeling Xenos to shoot. On the other hand, it's worth pointing out that this was still a couple years before the rebooted Alien prequel that would become Prometheus was even announced. There is a possibility, though extremely small, that this could have caused a conflict between Obsidian and IP holder 20th Century Fox, though Crucible would wind down before Prometheus would enter into production. Looking at this footage, however, it's clear as well that Crucible wasn't truly a horror game like, as programmer Anthony Davis cited, System Shock or Amnesia. Your player character Paris, who could be anything from a colonist or colonial marine to a medic or a recent liberal arts graduate, is trapped on Caldera, but the focus is more on building up your base first to survive and second to escape. It was much less about moment-to-moment scares and more an overarching tension that came from leading a group of survivors on a xenomorph-infested planet. As a result, a lot of the gameplay seemed to revolve around increasing your chances of survival, commanding companions on various missions throughout Caldera. Those decisions had lasting consequences. While you could take 3 companions with you out of a total of 16, permadeath was in play. If someone got, say, grabbed from a ventilation shaft, they were gone. And once one got facehuggered, it was your job to figure out how to deal with them. This to me is the most fascinating part of Crucible. While again, it wasn't the same traditional horror feeling of something like, say, Isolation would do a few years later, the idea of dealing with those around you being picked off one by one and you having to talk to your companions on the Ebon Hawk equivalent safe area about what to do feels like a great way to emulate those interpersonal moments Avellone and Sawyer felt the franchise did so well. Rather than being Ripley on the run at the very end of Alien, you were Ripley on the Nostromo in the second act, forced to give orders and try to keep everyone alive. It's in sharp contrast to other RPGs at the time that telegraph companion deaths a bit more obviously. To me at least, it feels like a bunch of smaller choices stacking on top of each other rather than one big one in the back half of the game. While a lot of these systems were definitely in place and many of the companions were fully written, for a lot of development, Crucible didn't look anything like this, and that played a huge factor on Sega pulling the plug. To be fair to Obsidian, game design isn't linear, and their thought process was to iron out all of the systems first before making sure it looked like a real game when they showed it off. It wasn't until they deliberately put together a demo with somewhat finished textures for a vertical slice for Sega did the game even remotely resemble a finished product. On top of that, they were really struggling from an animation perspective to get the look of the xenomorphs right. They are justifiably unlike anything else an animator is used to making, and it was causing some confusion in the team. This isn't something that was exclusive to Crucible either. Colonial Marines famously has Xenos that just mob straight at the player, and Isolation's designers mentioned the challenge in making their alien not move similar to a real terrestrial animal like a squirrel or dog, and instead make it feel otherworldly. Leaked animations from Crucible definitely seem to have this same problem, often moving on all fours like any number of animal enemies in action games, rather than something scary and unpredictable. To be less fair to Obsidian, even their own staff agreed it didn't have a strong vision, with the messy development to get even this far along resulting in the studio fully restructuring away from their flat organization. Previously, one producer was on top, acting similar to a project manager, with leads for each discipline, design, writing, etc. below them, trying to make decisions amongst themselves together. In its final days, lead designer Josh Sawyer would step up into a more traditional game director role, as no one was truly in place to make final decisions, forcing the project to feel unfocused and development getting caught up in interpersonal debates. As a whole, development was slow going. Sega had very little to show for 2.5 years of work, and it seemed that both Crucible and Colonial Marines had stalled. One had to go. In hindsight, I do think it's fun to justifiably make jokes at Colonial Marines' expense. It's a mess. Among some of gaming's most notorious capital B, capital G broken games, alongside debacles like Assassin's Creed Unity and Cyberpunk that has never come around to redeem itself like those games. But in 2009, if I was Sega, I'd understand where they were coming from. Crucible was a risk, and Obsidian's track record could be better. Gearbox, at least at that time, felt stable, had other games in development in the same engine, and wasn't making something that felt wholly new. The choice was obvious. A few weeks before Crucible was canceled, the team would show Sega another demo. To studio head Fergus Urquhart, this was the first real miracle milestone, where everything came together and it started to more closely resemble an actual game. When the publisher would see it, the reaction was justifiably, "Where has this been?" The milestone was more of a formality, and the decision to indefinitely suspend development and then outright cancel it shortly after was already a done deal. It came as a bit of a surprise to the team. While the development wasn't progressing as expected, particularly around the toolset within Onyx causing trouble creating new locations, it still felt like it was going significantly better than Alpha Protocol, which was all but rebooted internally. They'd finally figured out Crucible only for it to be canceled. When Sega announced the suspension of development in March 2009, they'd also moved to push back Gearbox's Colonial Marines into 2010, and slot in an Alien vs. Predator game from Rebellion to fill the gap. The blow to Sega was softened significantly when their studio Creative Assembly put together a short demo of their own idea for an Alien game, focused heavily on recapturing the feeling of the first film. Despite Sega's previous apprehension to greenlighting another Alien project, with their slate being down a game and the demo being an impressive mood piece, the publisher would give Creative Assembly the go-ahead to work on the game that would become Alien Isolation. It's only after the cancellation of Crucible that Colonial Marines really becomes the, unmitigated disaster it's known to be. In the wake of Borderlands' success and the acquisition of Duke Nukem Forever, Colonial Marines would be backburnered at Gearbox, meddled with by Sega, and outsourced to other studios. Famously, what was being shown off to the public didn't accurately represent the final game, and the whole thing would turn into a bit of a PR disaster. Isolation, however, would find an audience, and be largely carried by good word of mouth and, most importantly, great scares, to become not just a great video game, but a vital piece to the franchise. Existing as a sort of GoldenEye 64 for the series, an impressive facsimile of the films that acted as a gateway to the wider universe for a lot of players. For Obsidian, work would continue on Alpha Protocol until its scheduled October 2009 release, when, for reasons unknown, Sega would push the project into 2010, forcing it to launch just after Mass Effect 2. It didn't help that the game was still a bit rough around the edges, with lackluster gunplay and an odd checkpoint system. But looking back, it's kind of all charm, obviously a disaster underneath, but plays surprisingly well, in a way that's painfully 2010 and unlike anything of the era simultaneously. The studio also didn't come out of Crucible with nothing to show for it. They now had proprietary tech that they would use to pitch Atari on a new version of Baldur's Gate 3, a game that was canceled at their predecessor Black Isle Studios. While that deal would fall through, that pitch would be partially reworked into the action RPG Dungeon Siege 3. Their Onyx engine would also be used for their South Park RPG Stick of Truth, another example of Obsidian making a great game out of a bigger license that, like Alien Crucible, wasn't one you'd expect to have an RPG. On top of that, with Crucible's cancellation, Obsidian now had room for the relatively short development of another project that was signed in the last days of development, Fallout New Vegas. While they'd be working within Bethesda's tech and, again, in another franchise, New Vegas is, rightfully so, considered one of Obsidian's best games. And if I was forced to choose between it or Crucible, I'd choose New Vegas every time. It's literally my favorite game ever made. When 20th Century Fox was acquired by Disney in 2019, Alien's relationship with games changed to have Fox and Disney working more directly with developers on a case-by-case basis, similar to what's been done with Star Wars after their EA exclusivity deal ended. In 2021, when Fireteam Elite would release, Crucible director Josh Sawyer would be quick to point out how much its third-person perspective resembled what Crucible could have looked like. The similarities don't extend much further than that, but with it and Dark Descent's real-time tactical RPG setting, it's interesting to see the franchise return to its roots in Crucible, even if it's just a coincidence. Unlike other licensed games covered on this channel that, more often than not, feel like they're struggling under the weight of multiple stakeholders and companies that didn't quite understand how games work, Crucible, more than anything, just feels unlucky. Had it made it another milestone or been up for cancellation after the release of Borderlands, there's a real chance that it could have survived and been chosen over Colonial Marines, giving players an interesting, if not a bit clunky game in the franchise. But at the same time, Obsidian has had this uncanny ability to turn bad luck into good. When games get canceled, when the publishers call and pull the plug, they've always managed to turn around and not only survive, but also make some of their best games. So on one hand, there's part of me that's still curious about what Crucible was, but on the other, its cancellation allowed Obsidian to become the studio they needed to be.